Okay, should start recording. All right, as I was saying, I will continue to record these things, though we will be on campus next week. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for the class of critical thinking and the social sciences, or in sociology, or in social theory. Lecture number 2. The date is Friday, the 21st of August, 2020. And today we're going to talk about the ranking and evaluation systems and the curriculum of the social sciences and its relationship to society. And, well, we'll start to think about this. I mean, this whole course is thinking about that relationship, and we begin to unpack it, although in fact we began last week already a little bit, but more so today, and especially looking at curriculum, what is the content of the social sciences teaching and how we teach critical thinking, and how evaluation works. Now, I have a position on this that's mine, and I want to share that with you. You may share it yourself. You may think it's okay. You may think it's wrong. That's okay. As I was saying last week, every analysis comes from a perspective, and context is important. Background of the person giving the perspective is important, and institutional situation influences what they say. So with that in mind, what I'm saying is shared by others as well, but I'm saying in contemporary times, one thing that we see a lot is that teaching and research is called to account for itself. And the social sciences and humanities especially are often asked to show how they are relevant for vocational training, which means for your career. How am I going to get a job with this? Why do I need to know about Kakmak or Lenin or Max Weber or Thorsten Veblen or Gayatri Spivak or something? But I see more frequently than not, the demand is made for us to show how a profit will come from our research and teaching, especially from research or from teaching in fee-paying programs. How will it fund itself? Or how will it produce funding for those that are interested in seeing universities operate? I mean, I'm thinking here of a head of my former university, University of London, who asked me to think of how my research could contribute to consultancies for British industry. How is your research helping British industry, he said. And honestly, I hoped my research was not helping British industry. It was a critique of British industry. Well, I was working on terrorism, and terrorism especially of the state, the arms traders of which the US and Britain are the largest, Russia and France as well, and on the ways in which this was impacted on the South Asian diasporic community. So there was no way that a consultancy or any contribution to business was possible. But that's what the head of the university was interested to know. So showing how profit can be made from contract research, fee-paying programs, or some other kind of remunerative money-earning activity, running conferences for money or something like that. Of course, this is usually in a university just to keep the business of the university ticking over. But some universities are run for profit. In these circumstances, old romantic ideas like the pursuit of knowledge or investigative research, or even in the humanities, individual creative expression and the development of a critical approach, critical thinking to these circumstances, and ideas that are especially honed in the subject of the social sciences and humanities, they were not on the agenda of this pecuniary, profit-seeking orientation. And critical thinking in this circumstance stands seriously under threat. That same leadership of my old University of London wanted to know why across the university there were 7 different courses on critical theory. Why shouldn't there just be one? Because that would save money. Like as if there's only one approach or one perspective. You need 7 different, at least 7 different versions of this course so that it can be a debate and different perspectives can be put in front of you. If you were to think that this course was the only or the main or the authorized even way to do critical thinking, I'm missing the point. I'm teaching you badly. There needs to be a number of different critical perspectives brought to something, okay? And we debate. That's how the social sciences and humanities move forward. That's how society can also move forward. We are not following one leader. I mean, yes, we also do, but that leader also should be the one who is able to negotiate a number of different positions. Okay? So this is a context for this course, that we are called to account and we need to show continually. People keep on asking us to show how we are relevant, and there are different ways of doing that. Now, one way is to show that at the university we are very serious and successful, and we have world-leading scholars teaching you. Okay, and you must have seen in the press recently that Tham Luc Thang is in the world ranking of the academic ranking of world universities, ARWU, in the 701 to 800 rank for world, and #1 now in Vietnam. Great. Okay, that took a lot of work and a lot of effort, and has been subject to much discussion and debate, and that's good. And it's one way of showing. But here we are alongside other significant universities, the Open University of the UK, for example, just 3 above. The University of Waikato, I was just speaking to someone from there the other day. They're in New Zealand. They are just 1 above us. What's that one? University della Svezia Italiana, an Italian university, no, Swiss university. Swiss-Italian university, just after us. So these rankings, these world rankings, are important for showing that something serious is going on, and that the degrees, the teaching, and the research that goes on at the university is in the upper ranks of the world standard. Of course, you must realize that these rankings are a fairly blunt instrument, and often they don't take into account. I mean, if you look at the very top 1 and 2 positions, I think that's Harvard and Princeton, you see that those places also have huge amounts of real estate, can afford to buy in the better research teams. And so there's a property-based and a money-based bias built into this kind of ranking. This is not the only one ranking, there are many others. And these kind of beauty contests considered significant. A lot of investment goes into them, but they're not the only way. So I'm asking what a genuinely radical example of the university evaluating itself might be. Should it be this kind of league table, branding exercise of metrics, basically, quality assurance evaluations and so on? Or is there another kind of practice that will ensure the quality of the curriculum and the research that we are doing? Now, this is a discussion that's gone on in universities for some time. Key texts about this discussion will be Marilyn Strathern's book from 2000 called Audit Culture. Audit culture, as it refers, that term refers to the culture of measuring, auditing, having groups come in and assess the different criteria on which you judge curriculum, administrative procedures, research quality, employment practices, and everything now, from the environmental impact of the campus, which of course TDT does well, through to health and safety or ethnicity or different criteria. Okay. Another more critical version of this was David Graeber's book, Bullshit Jobs. And he was kind of arguing that this very kind of audit culture is a creation of a bureaucratic class that employs more and more of its own auditors to produce a administration-heavy institution. There are too many, for him, administrators who are just pushing paper around to measure things that maybe should be measured in a different way. So his argument is something like that these are bureaucratic beauty contests and cosmetic. The intellectual merit of those assessments and frankly quite opaque concepts of transparency that they rhetorically deploy, they are contagiously not transparent, and they're ill-suited to purpose, and so a danger to all. But we are in the competition that uses these metrics and tools, so we also have to participate. But my push in this course is that there's also another way to make those evaluations. So for this course, our debates begin by assuming three things. One, that the university has a responsibility to the wider community, now especially in the Global South, to the entire population. And it's the entire population of the university that has that responsibility. The students, the academic teaching and the research staff, but also the administrative workers, the support workers, the infrastructural staff, and users, stakeholders, vested interests in the public more widely. Now, often when we think about the university, we think of the bread and butter parts, right? Teaching and research. But what I'm encouraging you to think right now from the very beginning is there are a lot of different members of university to be thought about. Support staff, infrastructure staff, the people who are looking after the grounds, the people that are driving the vehicles that ferry people across from the campus or from to meetings or so on. The transport services and the food services and so on. These are all parts of the institution that make up the university. And so the question of responsibility needs to also take into account that and not only focus on what is put in front of families and parents as teaching, or in front of government as research. These are not the only parts of the university that we need to take into account and think about critically. Okay, that's one assumption. A second of three is that we will think critically from a social perspective. Right? These constituent groups of the university and those looking in on the university are certainly involved in review and assessment systems, but they're also capable of self-review, doing this, we call it criticism, self-criticism in some discourses. This can be supported, self-review can be supported probably at less cost than a centralized review system that most of the current evaluations work through. I mean, the apparatus that is the world ranking system, or in different national traditions, student assessment surveys and so on, are costly. And if it were built into every course and every program and every university and every section of the university, that there be a self-review, people looking at their own work, and everyone understood as a researcher and understood to be tasked from day one with participation in review, workplace inquiry, another way of describing this, or reflexive research, that will be a different kind of assumption. And it's a critical one, and from a perspective of the university as community. So that's number 2. And number 3, maybe this is the most important, is the calling to account that the wider community and communities are also invested in the university sectors, now spread across the globe, but they bring with them proliferation of perspectives and ambitions and styles of work and thinking, and in fact different ways of doing reflexive self-evaluation that should be considered, taken into account, a part of the mix, if you like, different styles, different modes, different forms of transparency. And they might in fact be non-compatible with each other, non-commensurable. They might not measure up together into one overall perspective, and yet that's an important part of the debate, because that's the connection between communities that are invested in, have an interest in what the university does for society, because they are society, and thinking about how that might be operationalized or inserted into the university review systems is critical, certainly, of the kind of assessment that we currently have. It will be something different and new. So there are 3 assumptions that are behind the critique that's been made here. Okay, so in this session, we're going to raise a number of topics or questions, or question topics, if you like, for thinking about the overall context of critical thinking in the social sciences within our university and within all universities. Now, the first one of those is what is in the curriculum. And the curriculum now includes, of course, obviously you're doing it, on critical thinking in the social sciences, and it was presented as one of critical thinking and globalization, or global integration. So I'm thinking about what is my responsibility in that, to what I put to you, and how one teaches critical thinking. I mean, one doesn't do it simply by attacking everything, or critical thinking is not cynical or negative, tearing down, but addressing the reasons for what exists and thinking about them and evaluating them for ourselves. And looking at the context in which these kind of courses and these kind of teachings and these kind of institutions operate, whether that be public or private, whether it be something that's more managerialist or something that's more governmental or top-down. And there's a general conceptual things, but there are also specific issues that we need to confront and discuss in the context of where we are. One, the difficulty of accepting or addressing the accreditation programs that are imposed by different bodies upon what we do. External assessment criteria, which might not match what it is that we're looking to have. This is the kind of thing that Graeber was talking about in his Bullshit Jobs book, that there's a lot of so-called red tape. Red tape because these papers, forms used to be tied up with red ribbons in the old bureaucracy. But bureaucratic assessment, hoop jumping through hoops. Oh, another one, let's skip number 3, is in the context of Vietnam, for example. We're talking a lot about developing the research culture of the university and the research culture of sociology by having people go abroad, go overseas for their higher degrees, for PhD. Now, that's not you yet, but certainly one question that is being put to you is, will you go on to further study? And quite often, families and also the faculty and the education system in Vietnam kind of expects that you'll go overseas and get a foreign degree, or at least degrees from overseas are rated very highly. And what that creates is a kind of brain drain. This phrase, brain drain, refers to how, after someone finishes their bachelor's degree, they're 21, 22 years old, they then go for 3 or 4 years, and sometimes longer because it takes longer, or maybe they work in a new place, they go overseas, and that is a loss to what's going on in the country for a number of years of the most energetic and creative parts of the lives of those who are going for those degrees. They bring their energy and their investment and their drive, their research to another place. Now, the idea is, of course, they will then bring it back later to Vietnam, and that will develop. And against that, the university wants to develop its own PhD programs and have people put that energy within the country. In other places, I'll talk about that later, in other places like India, they've been pushing very hard to counteract that brain drain. Many researchers from India for many, many years had been going to America or England, or then America and Germany, especially in electronics, new media, going to America and to Europe. And that was drawing people out of the development project of India. I mean, this is the topic of placements and as well, overseas consultancies for researchers, and training that values the international and international experience over what can be got in country. And the effort, whole point of TDTU, I suppose, is the effort is to bring up the levels training for research and for teaching within the country to be a better option, or at least an equivalent option to going to Taiwan or Australia or the US for your higher degree. And so this is a part of the kind of thing that Thorsten Veblen is talking about, where the drive to vocation. Hang on, somebody wants to come into the meeting. Okay, come. Drive to vocation and the pecuniary interest in financial interest in selling training is also put on the table for discussion. Okay, so in the comments, you can in the chat, you're welcome to raise questions. Somebody had said they can't hear. Okay, you've got text. They've also left the meeting. Can somebody confirm that they can hear what I'm saying? Can you? Why not? My microphone is on. No, you can hear. Okay, so somebody else who's having trouble. Some people have different levels of internet access, and that's something is also about the institution. That will change next week because we'll be in person. Okay, back to where I'm at. So one other way of making these assessments is the student survey. Asking across the university, here this is University of London, how satisfied students are with the teaching. Now, how of a university? In this graphic, which you can see now on the slide as well, you see that it's presented as a horse race. Right? And this is a little graphic that was made to show the response rate of the different departments in the college that it's from, and how many people had filled in, how the staff had done in getting students to fill in, right? Because that was the mission of the graphic, was to encourage people to do more, to race to the 66 line, right? The line of this would make the survey valid. And it's pretty revealing what the result was, that the discipline in this college that filled in a lot of student surveys and was successful in getting past the 66 level. The only one that got past the 66 level was psychology. And of course, the stereotype of psychology is they like surveys. They fill in, answer questions. And the one that is losing the race, or the ones that are losing the race, are maybe those disciplines that are more critical of the blunt instrument that is a student survey. So anthropology, education studies, and politics. I would have thought sociology would be quite low, but of course sociology also do a lot of survey work, I suppose. Not the kind of sociology I'm into, but yeah, okay. That's how it is. Educational studies, low. Why? I think because I had a bit to do with that department. I think because there the perspective is a community responsibility and community education and thinking a lot. In some ways they were a bit, what's the word for it? Cheesy or twee or a bit hippie or so-called alternative, but they're certainly oriented towards community education. And so something like a national administrative exercise like the Student Response Survey, National Student Survey, sorry, was one that they were not really behind. They thought it was too blunt because it produced these general numbers, like, 66% was considered what would make the survey valid, and of those 66%, say 34 people said yes, the teaching was good, then you got a tick. And if 32 people only said, you were below. And because of the averaging and the league tables that were set up on the consequence of this, people could manipulate the survey. And in fact, this graphic, which is encouraging people to get them to fill it out, is part of that enticement to fill the survey, to manage the result. So instead of realistically showing that people couldn't be bothered to fill in the forms, which is what was happening, let's face it, people thought this is really a silly exercise. Instead of the results reflecting that, they intervene to try and show that yes, we're all behind the assessment and we're doing the right thing, because branding, impression management, showing that the university participates in the national effort was a kind of false premium. Anyway, a bit of fun, because why is it a horse race? And that's just so absurd. Like, okay, the important thing about a horse race that you need to remember is you bet on them. So I wish I'd put money on psychology because they're winning. But actually, in my head, I think because anthropology is the least, I think they're winning. They're doing better by not filling it in. Okay, so the orientation that I've taken in this class in the past, and I've written an article now about this and made a film that we'll see later, is this, that everyone should be seen as a researcher from the start. Everyone, and I don't mean just the teachers as researchers or even you as students as researchers, although I do think that that's how you should see yourself from day one. That you are searching for knowledge. This is not the model of education where you are somehow some passive receiver of knowledge, where somebody lifts up the top of your head and pours knowledge in. Right? It's a more active role where you are the one that is seeking. Right? Research means a search. The word search is right in there. You get an idea of an area. There's an area like, I don't know, psychology or anthropology or sociology or sociology of migration, and there are questions and there are some things that you know there's an area, but you also know there's some things you don't know about it, and you need to search for that information. And that can be new knowledge or can be already existing knowledge, but it's your effort as a seeker. That's the active part, rather than waiting somehow for it to be poured into you. Or I don't know, think of Keanu Reeves in the film The Matrix, if you'd seen that, where he gets different abilities injected into him. Suddenly he knows Kung Fu, he says. Like as if you can, without practice, absorb knowledge. Now, this model is also to be criticized, to be questioned, because this is sort of it's the nature of all things, really. But there's a way of talking about this, which raises the issue of the co-constitution of knowledge between those that produce and those that receive. And a contribution economy is one way of talking about it. Actually, by a man called Bernard Stiegler. He died 10 days ago or so. His obituary is in the press this week. Maybe it was 2 weeks ago. Died at the age of 68, I think he was. And he was a theorist of this so-called contribution economy. And basically, he's paying attention to the way in which the algorithm of Google, for example, works. That without you doing searches for knowledge, the Google algorithm doesn't improve. Right? So the contribution there is that the eyes on screen, eyes on sites, add to the effectiveness of the algorithm. And that adds to the quality of the algorithm, and so that adds to the general intellect in the Marx sense. But that goes back, actually, that contribution goes back to the very basics of all research and all, in fact, knowledge. Think about how writing and reading are co-constituted. Without readers, writing doesn't really exist. A book can't exist without a reader. I mean, a book is just paper without someone that knows the language and reads. So there is also a contribution on the part of the person looking through a book, taking their perspective into the text. So this is another key, wider concept or assumption that we'll work on in the coming weeks, and that it has a critical component. How is it that the algorithm, which is owned by a corporation now, is improved by our participation as consumers and buying that time and contributing our effort as and paying for the privilege of contributing our effort to improve the algorithm? How has it become such a commercial operation rather than this ideal of developing the general intellect or knowledge, social knowledge or society's knowledge, to the benefit of some very, very wealthy individuals, of course, who own the algorithm? The corporations, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and so on. I guess another dimension of this is we're trying to keep an eye on the shape in which knowledge takes in the digital and neoliberal and the global context, while we are also thinking of a kind of wider context of humanity and the planetary, that we are just a brief speck here for a short time, and that this algorithm will be there for longer, and other forms of knowledge are there for much longer than we ourselves are. And that's very profound, I'm sure. But let's just think of the different ways in which these three assumptions or perspectives are framed. One, you're much bigger than only an individual student. You're a researcher. You belong to a bigger operation that is general intellect and so on. And yet you are small in the sense of you're just a small part of this general intellect. And that our contribution is microscopic. Not microscopic, it's very small. By looking at sites, we add a little value to the algorithm, because the algorithm feeds only on what it is that you choose to look at. And you can see that in the texts that we've got for reading. Okay, you see that I've translated some of these points. I hope they make it clear. I'm not 100% confident in the translation. If someone sees there's something wrong in the translation, it'd be really your contribution to this economy in the co-constitution of making this lecture work will be to help me get the translation more improved for the next time. I use this slide, this page, and some of the others that I've got today for you. For example, this one, where now I have a number of topics that I think are for us to confront critically in any frank discussion of the global context in which our university and the university as such is. The first of these is global structural inequality. We are in Vietnam, and we're in, well, people call it different, according to different schemas. We're in the global south. It used to be called a third world. There was a first world, a second world, a third world. the global south, south versus north, or used to be east versus west. There's developing. Is there declining? Well, there should be declining, because there are some senses in which the old empire is fracturing and unraveling. But there is no question that one of the contexts for any discussion of this critique is the global structural inequality in the ranking systems. You can see it, but just in the way in which knowledge circulates, whether it be the publishing industry, or which researchers feel or where researchers want to be or go, and where the research teams, the big research teams are. Now, a thing that shapes that structure, that's really important for how we can think about this, is under the topic of translation. And I don't mean the translation that's operated here in translating English directly into Tingviet words. Okay, that's a part of it. But what John Solomon calls the regime of translation, that there is a inequality in the drive to always translate academic work into the languages of the global publishing circuit. Right, so largely English, sometimes French and German, and Spanish coming up, and then I think Chinese. The translations that are operating into Korean are part of it, and of course in Vietnam, translation of some academic work. But translation is a shaping topic. We should think very carefully about how much value is placed on those that do translation. It's not very highly paid and recognized. It's not encouraged by the auditing. See how this is a way in which the auditing mechanisms are biased. Our assumption that they don't recognize that maybe in translating a work, there might be as much intellectual and academic effort in a translation as there are in writing an article about the same old topic that a certain researcher has been writing over and over. But that new topic, a new article that researcher might write might go into a journal that gets a lot of credit. They might do a translation for the same journal, the same index journal, but won't get the credit in the metric, in the ranking systems that evaluate this. Although there are slight exceptions to that, but on the whole, the publishing circuit is shaped by the idea of new research and original work, and that excludes certain languages. And English is the dominant publishing circuit, and publishers based in London and in the USA certainly favored over anyone else. Another big factor here is how education is an export business. Now, we already saw this in the example of the brain drain, but also think of the way in which education is being sold, packaged and sold in different ways in the marketplace, with the arrival, for example, of international universities in Asia, setting up campuses in Asia. RMIT Vietnam as an example, or Greenwich University, or what are the other ones that are here in Ho Chi Minh City? Fulbright, they're over there at Crescent Mall, aren't they? Is that the Fulbright College? I think so. I can't think of others, but there are 20 or 30 franchised universities from outside in Vietnam selling education, and those universities set up those courses not out of some philanthropic or generous spirit, but because they see the opportunity to build part of their institution and their global brand by being located somewhere outside of their original space. This is happening in nearly everywhere. Okay, in Malaysia you have Monash University and a number of others. You have in China different versions of campuses like Nottingham, and in Singapore, Yale University is very big there, and NUS, Yale, National University of Singapore, Yale, and so on. Now, I'm sure it's not only a profit-making venture to set up these campuses, because it's a risk and so on, but certainly that's a big part of the calculation being made by those universities. And why would we set up in Vietnam or in Malaysia if not to take the opportunity to market our degrees to a wider constituency than their home city? For example, Monash, which is from Melbourne University, is in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, so it's not even central, and it grew itself by having a number of external campuses to become one of the largest universities in Melbourne, because it wasn't locked into the geography of the city centre and those who could come to that city centre to study. Melbourne's not a huge city. It has 5 major universities, so there wasn't that many students that would allow a place to grow beyond 12,000 or something. That I think Monash was 17,000 in 1980, and now is something like 400,000 because of its overseas campuses. Now, that's a massive expansion and economy of scale as well. So a smaller number of teachers teach a larger number of students, and so there's financial components to that thinking, that calculation. I've already mentioned this topic of audit culture that belongs to neoliberalism, and we'll talk more and more about that. And in a previous course, I know that you did, and we're going to go into it a lot deeper in this course, the research lab model, or the think tank, the innovation hub, or the science park. There are many different names for these things, but they are also a part. We are encouraged to make research groups or research teams, or build. This is a model built on the sciences that doesn't necessarily translate well into the social sciences and humanities in all cases, but certainly we are encouraged to go down this path for the science park model, because there the idea is you get your researchers together and get them to think about what knowledge can be marketed for money, what inventions can then be commercialized. And that's what a science park or a think tank or an innovation hub should do. It should take the abstract ideas of scholarship and turn them into products, develop them into new 4.0 technology, or new web applications, or technological innovations in marketing or microprocessing, or a science park and an innovation hub is designed to turn ideas into commodities for the benefit of the university. And of course there's contracts and patents and money involved in that in a big way, and we need to think critically about how that works too. Now, do the universities or do the companies have a monopoly on innovation, commercialization, the imperatives of turning ideas into money? No, of course they don't. Companies, and we see this more and more, take on that university role, right? Or at least the rhetoric of the university. Think of how a company like Microsoft or Google now has its most innovative part, the part of generating new product for the company, based on something they call a campus, right? The Microsoft campus, the Google campus. They think of their operation in a diversified structure, but the really important and profit-generating part, right? Because your new ideas are where you get advantage, financial advantage, because everybody else gets the old ideas, right? And you farm out your manufacture to other sites, but you keep your new idea generation, your innovation hub, your center, close to your home base, on your Google campus or on your Microsoft campus or in Silicon Valley, because that's the profitable part of any business. New product, new idea, because you're going to be out ahead of any competition if you've got a new product to sell, a new phone, a new application, a new this. Now, there's a window in which you can sell your new product for a while. Other people don't have it. If you're lucky enough to have something really good, it takes a couple of years, sometimes less nowadays, for those other members of the market to say, hey, we need to be producing one of those as well, and catch up. At that point, your production might be producing, hundreds of phones, but your profit will decline because others enter the market. So what you really want is yet another great new idea that you can lead the market again. And the campus, the university model, the Science Park Innovation Hub think tank model is crucial for that. Now, where are the humanities and social sciences in relation to that? We can have this phrase, right? I have this phrase, semi-feudal cyber-colonialism, the highest stage of imperialism, as the description of that, especially where the innovation hub is located in a former feudal society. And I've spoken about Malaysia as one of these. The Malaysian Prime Minister, Mahathir, wasn't Prime Minister for a while, he's Prime Minister again until just recently. He used to say, 20 years ago, that companies like then Netscape and Microsoft should come to Vietnam for microchip production because, and this was a feudal comment, the people, especially young women of Malaysia, were very good at detailed work. He said, because for generations, we have a long, long tradition of basket weaving. And so he was thinking that because they were good at basket weaving, they would be good at microchip production. There's a kind of way of selling your own people into colonial servitude, but now a digital or a cyber colonial servitude. He is a feudal lord, effectively. Yeah, that's my critique. Okay, it's not necessarily true, but it's a perspective. Now, if we're going to frankly discuss these problems, we have some models as well we can think about, and we have some real issues that we have to engage with. Okay, and I think of this as research capacity. How does the nation really claim back that research capacity from the way in which knowledge has been turned into a monetary a competition for who will have the innovation hub and center? And how does research capacity get built up in a country if not through a national campaign? And in some ways, TDTU and its ranking is part of that kind of campaign. But not only that, a whole lot of other things are involved there, like hiring good researchers and having them paired with scholars from Vietnam and developing research culture within the faculties and the university. I mean, maybe one way to think about that is how the literacy program of Ho Chi Minh in the 40s, 1940s, 50s, really became a national effort for everyone, involving everyone at every level of society. Because in some ways, that's what is required for research capacity, that everyone be seen as a researcher. And that means really facing up to frank discussion of problems, facing up to the problem of what I call the plagiarism problem, but it's really the problem of just copying. If you're not the innovator of new ideas, the searching out of new ideas, you are only copying what other people have already done. Whether that's microchip production for the innovators of the Google campus in the US, just producing formula shoes. Yes, there's some benefit in having Nike come and do its production in Vietnam rather than China, because you get the jobs. But without innovating, without owning that research, that knowledge, it's just copying. And it's not the basis for a real takeoff, a real development. We could debate that, of course. But I see the plagiarism issue, the copying issue, that goes from learning by rote when you're very young, by copying, which is how you learn your first language and so on, all through school and high school and into university, without changing is a real problem. And I'm very strict on this, and I've said it over and over, and I've had examples already in this course of people copying, and you cheat yourself. You cheat the nation, you cheat the country, you risk your reputation, and you end up merely replicating second status. I'm really serious about this one. I mean, this is absolutely crucial. I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad. I'm saying that without a change without a national level commitment to changing the way in which we do things, right? And I would say this is research literacy, not plagiarizing, is part of a component of the literacy program for research that we need. I'd say another thing we also need is to think about how teaching and how curriculum works, and introducing a teaching qualification in every university degree. Now, this is something that hasn't really been discussed among our program, but you know, it's an idea I'm throwing out. Don't you think that every one of us should become skilled in being able to teach, being able to convey their ideas, and that we should have a formal qualification as part of any MA, PhD track? These are things for discussion. As I said, I keep on using India as an example, but that's where I've worked for my research for 30 years, 32 years now, 33 years now has been in India. So I'm shaped a little bit about by what India has done in terms of education. And they, for 20 years now or more, have been trying to win back those good qualified candidates who left India as the brain drain, and to win back also knowledge and the literacy that belonged to India actually 300 years ago. I mean, 300 years ago, before the British colonials came, India was the center of the world. 1/4 of world production was in Bengal. Silks and cotton goods and all sorts of creative work. The 1/4 of the wealth of the world was there. And that's why the international powers, France, first of all, Portugal, Spain, but France, England, Denmark, why those colonial powers came to India because it was the site of that wealth, and they extracted the goods, first of all, but also the practices, the knowledge that was located there. And by the 20th century, the East India Company and the British Raj had turned that wealthy part of the world into a place of mass poverty. Despite a small elite of comprador class, that led the independence movement, is now leading India towards a kind of fascist current regime. Is deeply problematic, a part of global capitalism. What Ashish Nandy calls an intimate enemy, that class that sees themselves as Western. Okay, but the effort of India to reshape its education is one that's very interesting, because they have built up home universities, Indian Institutes of Management and so on, and Calcutta University, Jaipur University, some institutes that are really of world class. So in the ranking system, you see they are quite high, some of these universities now, and they have done maybe what Vietnam wants to do. All right, very different consequences for Vietnam because of a different history, but although colonized too, but by France and by the US. But if we think of history as the general intellect, the knowledge that should belong to all people, and is continually captured by these imperial bodies, which was the East India Company 300 years ago and is Google and Microsoft today, then we need to rethink Marx's concept of the general intellect, because it's very useful for recognizing general intellect means generally owned by all. It is the patrimony, all peoples of the world should benefit from world knowledge, not some companies using others as places for production or as customers only, especially now that as customers we contribute to the development of the product. So you can read the section on the general intellect in Marx's book, The Grundrisse, if you're really keen. I'll see if I can't put that, let me make a note, put that onto the Google Stream. It's only a short section, but really it's crucial. I guess also some Bernhard Stiegler, in case people want to know, the guy that I said died recently, want to know what this contribution economy is about. Contribution economy. So I'll put up texts like that for those who are interested to read. That's what this course will be, largely, pointing you to things that are really interesting to think about, the development of critique and the place of knowledge, the shape of knowledge in our contemporary world. Okay, sorry, the translation of that India's example slide was a separate page. I'll let you read that. Actually, while I take a break. Ashish Nandy, I mentioned there, the intimate enemy. His argument is that, like Homi Bhabha's mimic men, a class of comprador figures. They led the independence movement, Mahatma Gandhi and Subhash Chandra Bose and so on, but they are also taken by the desire to imitate the West. And the West somehow gets inside their head. So it's an intimate configuration of knowledge and culture that's also what they are opposed to, because it's colonized. And yet they can't not want it. not wanted. They have to engage with history, the history of colonialization, and come through the other side of the dialectic of colonialism. That also is part of the general intellect. The first 20 pages of Ashish Nandi's book, The Intimate Enemy, are searingly good. White light critique. I should put that up on the website as well, on the stream. I think I have a copy. I'm not 100% sure of that. I'll check. Okay, to continue. We hear a lot about internationalization. But that's a good. Right? Now, is there one internationalization that we're going for? We talk about it in terms of structure, format, resources, rules, testing, auditing, outcomes, continuity. We are developing an international level research culture, or we are in an international competition for status or ranking or branding, or that our contribution to knowledge will be a contribution to the international or global debate about education. But there are ways to consider if that one context is the only shaping context. You can read the work of a man called Samir Amin. Let me put that on the chat, his name, because I can see that his name was not being spelt correctly by the captions. Samir Amin. It's also a bit slow. Okay, very slow. Too slow. But Samir Amin's work is really interesting because he has one book called De-linking, and he suggests that maybe the path for some global South nations is to de-link from that global circuit of capital and of the publishing circuit that runs through London and New York. I mean, there are publishing circuits that don't run through London and New York. Left World Books in India. India has its own publishing circuit, but it's not as its own academic publishing circuit. It's not as prestigious. It's not as effective in ranking. But Samir Amin's argument is that we can break with that one path for all model. I don't know whether you can build an educational philosophy, a critical educational philosophy following the trends of integration and development according to Samir Amin's perspective or someone else's. But certainly these themes for discussion, everyone as a researcher, as I've already discussed, the ruthless criticism of all that exists. There's a perspective from Karl Marx, in his letter to Rouge. The need for time, for research, for thinking, for teaching, for education, to be developed, literacy, especially where the language translation issue, that requires more time. I know as well as anyone that learning a new language is hard. Practical, Indian especially, right? And the development of capacity. Do I not have that translated? What a shame. I need to translate this page. I think we face problems that we have to discuss. They are really big problems. And they have to do with time, have to do with capacity, have to do with context, have to do with globalization. So the historical consequences of the intimate enemy, the dominance of Western thinking in our heads, even at the same time as we would like to suggest there's an alternative to that. The theft of colonialism, which took away capacity, experience, or confidence. But in Vietnam's case, a confidence that comes from having pushed back against that. I mean, there are no winners in a war, but there's certainly confidence that can come from being able to stand up against the global superpower. But there can be no easy road to knowledge. Marx had already said this as well. No cutting of corners, because the global translation machine and the possibility of being heard is difficult. So we have to engage with these problems. And they might be ones that are cultural factors. Right? The habitual deference to the male of the family, for example. Mores, hierarchy, party structures, respect structures. I'm not saying don't be respectful and so on, but they are shaping the ways in which we fit, Vietnam, any global South place, or anyone really, fits into the global context, whether as autonomous or responsible. So this problem about how we enter into the standardized processes of ranking and curriculum and what is teaching and who is the audience, who is actually the university, whether it's modernized, democratized, socialized, integrated in what way. We need to examine each of these terms. They're each worth an essay, I'm pretty sure. Curriculum, for example, developing a curriculum, not having one answer model, learning from each other. How about this for meta? But now you can read this. Okay. The idea here is to think about what is the curriculum, what is on the curriculum of a course like critical thinking. What teaching methods are appropriate. Like we're going to, next week, I hope, won't just be me speaking at you, but we will go step by step through texts on the board together. It's really crucial that we not have one answer model and not have one teaching model. We try not diversity 1, diversity 2, diversity versus not the formula versions of different perspectives, but we invent new models for affirmative speaking, whether it be small group work or role models or reading out loud, or another kind of repetition. Because the idea here is that curriculum means critical thinking means something other than filling you up with information, right? It's not information retrieval, the sort of thing you can search through the algorithm on Google. It's having the wherewithal to be able to manipulate that information in ways that take account of the assumptions and the problems and the context that we've been talking about here today. You know what? Does anyone who enters into this global context of massive amounts of data, of information, what does anyone do with that? And how can we become more skilled at the manipulation for what ends knowing and more skilled at knowing how and why and what we would want to do with this abundance of data that we have access to now. And how do we learn to do that? Learn from each other, and not just how to market that. How do we learn to market it? Can be part of it, but also how do we learn to do other things with it? How do we learn responsibility? I have a pretty big commitment to someone who emailed me today, to the work of Gayatri Spivak. And she's a big professor at Columbia University in America, but she's from India. She's continually saying that having the wherewithal to deal with what has globalized, which is information and finance, means that we need to work slowly, carefully, at a self-reflexive, non-coercive way to reconfigure how we desire, or we want, how we want to use knowledge. And that's what the humanities and social sciences can bring to the science part, to the university, to the manipulation, to the monetized version of knowledge that belongs in the think tank. We can bring the critical wherewithal to be able to make conscious decisions about why we use knowledge in such and such a way. Very ambitious, and so quite profound. So following Spivak, and I'm going to talk next week much more about Spivak. It's the path of the transformation of universities into sites of critical thinking means that everyone in the university should be doing self-reflective evaluation, assumptions of, research as critique for all levels and all members of the university community. So what I was saying at the start about the university community, not just being the students and the teachers, think about research in catering, in groundkeeping, the environment of the university, how different or how a possible university might be if we have those people responsible for, I don't know, the car parks, thinking about air quality and the best and most effective ways to assemble the inflow and outflow of traffic onto the campus, right? Those jams that we have. So these are areas for research that our members of the university are best placed to be examining. Maybe in collaboration with us, research teams are possible. But if we reconfigured the way we thought about research for all members of the community, we'd be able to answer those questions where the humanities and social sciences are called to account for themselves. But because we would be accounting for ourselves by saying this is what mass training and institutional reflexivity can be like. Sorry, just checking my slides. I'm going to talk a lot in a future class about counter mapping, parallel sociology, workplace exposure, commissions, delegates, tribunes, and a thing called co-research, which names a group of existing methodologies. Just giving you a clue as to what's coming up. When we come to assessment, for this course, I'm going to ask you to think very carefully about other members of the university besides students and staff, and think of what research and evaluation would be in their context. Now, if we were in class together like we will be next week, right now I would ask you to get out pens and paper, which I have ready, colored pencils and pieces of paper, to draw your map of the university and the different kinds of labor that in a day make it possible for you to turn up to the class. Think of all the different kinds of work that makes possible this moment. For example, somebody built the computer, somebody is maintaining the electricity, the internet, somebody has made the clothes for your uniform. I assume you're all sitting at home in TDT uniform, right? I'm sitting at home wearing a tie. Unusual. The amount of labor that goes into all of the different things. Somebody made the pens and pencils that we use. Somebody made the paper, cut down the trees. Somebody built the classrooms that we're not in right now. Somebody, right, the amount of investment in the creation of the educational exchange and moment of research or teaching is massive, and we should reflect upon it. And I want the assessment to be that. This is in the model of a Marxist tradition, sure, factory exposures, worker education, parallel sociology from the Frankfurt School. And I'm going to explain a lot of these things and give you references to read around this. I find it really exciting in co-research, where you research with me on these topics for what would the ideal university be? The ideal social use of knowledge, what that will be, is where I want to get to. Now, I'm just giving a taste of that right now. And these have been the questions we've been asking about curriculum, about problems, facing up to issues, perspectives and time and the brain drain and plagiarism and how we get research culture really as a concern for the whole nation, not just for those in the university, but society in general. Something like literacy. Research culture is another level of literacy. Translation issues, how the publishing circuit in the globe affects how the dominance of English affects us, because English is difficult for you or no. We're working in translation. I'm trying to put that into the context. How the audit culture operates, how we want to get past the rhetoric of only seeing the ranking as a horse race and seeing it as actually something fundamental to research culture and knowledge culture. All of these things, I'm just doing a bit of a revision now. As I say, my examples are my own perspective, shaped by my history, time in India, time in Australia, time in England. And you will bring your own as well. A bit younger than me, okay, but also your own and valid, into examining each of these terms. And I hope getting to rethink 100 flowers blooming, that's Mao Zedong there, right? In this tradition that's not just communist tradition or socialist tradition, also includes work like Figiel and Schukaitis and Walker, Schukaitis and Graeber, magazines like Riff Raff and Aufheben. I will be putting some of these links up in the next, how many weeks we got left? 13 weeks to develop this perspective. The assessment will not be huge. I'm not asking you to even write a long essay in this course. We'll be doing practical tasks. We'll talk about that more next week. And it will be in the context of co-research. I will put up a bit of film for you to watch for next week rather than a piece of reading. And it's an introduction to the teacher and researcher Gayatri Spivak. So that will be very soon, might even already be up on the classwork page. I saw a lot of people did their classwork in the last day. I know from the beginning of yesterday, only 13 out of 50 had done it, but now another 20 had come. So thank you for that. There will be more classwork, but this time it's give your personal response to the video work of Spivak. It's our way of introducing her as well, because in the lecture on next Friday, I will talk a lot about her and what her work entails. Okay, I think for today, that's going to be it. As usual, I will stay on the chat for a while, and I will add more texts on the Google Classroom stream for you to read. And that will be where we can also have discussion. Any comments you have about Spivak's work or the Veblen text or any of the others that are coming up, and maybe even the assessment. But the assessment will appear in next week's lecture. At the end of that, I'll describe what that will be in some detail. So for today, that's all the lecture part. We can have now a discussion. I'll stop recording. And see you on in person next week. Thank you for listening.